Welcome to Voices of Adoption, where we share unique perspectives, actionable advice, and meaningful stories of birth parents, adoptees, adoptive families, and other members of the adoption community. I'm Donna Pope, Executive Director of Heart to Heart Adoptions.
And I'm Nathan Gwilliam, founder and former CEO of Adoption.com.
Together, we've been part of thousands of adoption journeys over the past 25 years, and we're so glad you're here.
Let's begin today's conversation.
Hi, welcome to Voices of Adoptions. We're super excited to have Christina Dent with us here today. And Christina is the founder and the vice president of the mission at End It for Good. And we're super interested in finding out what that's all about. But it's a nonprofit dedicated to shifting the conversation around drugs and addiction from punishment to health-centered solutions. Now, that's going to be fun to hear how that goes. She's a former foster mom who became the adoptive mom through the fostering journey. So she's an adoptive mother. She has, and her life and her work have shaped her experiences with families affected by substance abuse. One of the most important things, and I'm going to ask her to tell it right off the bat, is that she walked with a birth mom of the child that she eventually adopted, and learned a lot about substance abuse through that. And so, Christina, welcome.
Thank you so much, Donna. It's really exciting to be here and just great to have this conversation.
And let's start right out with your story. So tell us about when you were fostering, tell us about the child you were fostering and what happened from there.
Yeah, so my husband and I started fostering in 2014, and we ended up having 3 placements. So one of them we adopted. That was our first placement. He never left. Our second placement is actually the story I'm going to tell you today. And he was with us for a short time and ended up going back with his mom. Our third placement was with us for 2 years before he ended up going back with his birth family. And we have had no contact since he went back. And so 3 very different experiences of kind of the endings. Even though we only had 3 placements, we had kind of 3 of the kind of major impacts that you can have: adoption, short-term, but really life-changing, and then long-term and return to family with no contact, which is my heart goes out to the many families who have walked that road also, and that kind of loss of connection after so long.
And I would totally agree with you. And people that are listening to this, some of them may be trying to decide, should I foster, and with the hope of fostering to adopt, or do I want to go through the challenges of that? What would you say to them right off the bat?
I would say, if your heart longs to be the lifelong parent of a child, fostering could be a pathway to that, but it is very likely to include lots of heartbreak along the way, and it may not end in that. And I think for those of us who have longed for children in a season where we did not have them, we want to believe that what we want to work out is what is going to work out. And we have seen over and over and over again through the years that we fostered, and also my husband ended up working for our foster care system for 5 years after that as a foster parent liaison for part of that time, working with foster families. And we have seen so many families absolutely crushed because they came in thinking, I'm going to foster to adopt, and believing, whatever the system tells me about this child is going to happen. And in reality, that often doesn't happen. And so I would say be very careful with what you are opening yourself to. I'm a person who believes God leads us to things, and he absolutely can lead us to things that can be really hard. But a lot of people we have seen go in with the belief that if I want to adopt, that's what will happen. And what can happen is you foster a child for 2 years like we did. We raised him for his first 2 years of life. And just after his second birthday, he left, and we have never heard from him again. And our family, that grief and that loss reverberates through our family still today. And that was, he left in January of 2018. We're 8 years out, and it is still impacting and all of us. It's still a grief that we all carry and are working through. So that's the very real reality of what can happen. And that is, and foster care is always the hope is that they're able to reunify, that there's whatever brought them into foster care can be healed and solved in some way, and they can go back with their birth family. It's really hard, sometimes to cheer for that, even though that's what we sign up for as foster parents. But really to get back to your original question about, how we got into this issue, particularly of kind of how are we approaching drugs and addiction, which is what I do like full time now. This is my job, is talking about this particular issue of drugs and addiction and how we approach that.
And I'm going to go back to the name of your thing, End It for Good. Tell me why you called your company End It for Good.
Yeah, so chose that because I wanted to convey two things. One, that there was a very specific thing that isn't working that we want to end, which is approaching drugs and addiction through a primarily criminal justice lens. But also that we want to end that for good purposes. So it's a play on words of ending it for good. We want it because we believe it's going to lead to a better world, more healthy families, more children growing up in healthy homes, and less fracturing of families. That is why children end up in foster care. And so I grew up here in Mississippi. I still live in Mississippi. I've lived here my whole life, and grew up in a, wonderful family, happy childhood. I thought I had the world figured out, by the time I was an adult, as many of us do. And in my early 30s, when my husband and I started fostering, all that I had taken in from the culture around me was drugs are bad, and people who use drugs are bad, and people who struggle with addiction are even worse. And so I didn't really have any knowledge of the primary reason why children end up in foster care. The majority of children in foster care are there for some sort of drug-related reason. And I had no context for that. What's going on? Why are their parents using? What causes addiction? So we end up with our first foster son. We had no contact with his birth family. And so it wasn't until our second foster son that we did, and it was immediate as soon as he came to us. And he came to us straight from the hospital. And
did you know, even before you got him, that drugs had been involved?
Yes, we did. And we also knew that his mom really wanted to regain custody of him. The social worker said that when she brought him. She was like, his mom is so motivated. She is just wants him back so badly. And that already, Donna, I couldn't really put that together in my mind. Wait a second. You were just using drugs like a couple weeks ago before he was born, but you really want to get him back. Because in my mind, I only had that grid of thinking, she must not love him. She must not care about him because she made this choice to use drugs while she was pregnant.
Why doesn't she just stop?
Just stop. Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to be pregnant and you wanted to have this child, why were you using? It just made no sense to me. And so he came to our house, and a couple of days later, I brought him to his first appointment at the to visit his mom. Joanne is her name, at the child welfare office. And I pulled into the parking lot and popped his car seat out of the car. And I had my other 3 boys with me, because we had 2 boys by birth before we started fostering, and they were all with me. It was a crazy time of life, 4 small boys in my home. So I get him out of the van and I turn around in the parking lot, and here comes this woman running across the parking lot towards me. And
how old? About?
Let's see. She was my age. So that would have been, she was about 32. And so she comes running across the parking lot, and she's crying, and she just runs up and starts kissing this baby. And, I'm kind of awkwardly holding his car seat on the crook of my arm and thinking, like, what is happening? This doesn't really make sense to me. And so she goes to spend her 1 hour of visitation with him, and I come back and pick him up. Such a sweet picture that's just stamped into my memory of coming into the visitation room and seeing her holding him. He's sleeping on her shoulder, and she's just sitting there with her eyes closed, just drinking him in. She wasn't like playing on her phone. She was so trying to use every minute of that 1 hour that she was given to connect with him. And that started for me a continued journey of having kind of bricks pulled out of this foundation that I had of people who use drugs are bad people is kind of the main message that I had gotten from the culture growing up in the 80s and 90s. And so she left for inpatient treatment, and she could call me once a day from treatment. They allowed her to do that, and I gave her my cell phone number, and so she would call and ask, she wanted to know everything about what he was doing. How much was he eating, and when was he eating, and when was he happy, and all the things, just like any mom would who was separated from her child. And then she would ask me to put her on speakerphone, and she would sing to him over the phone. And those were really just sacred experiences, feeling like I was just on holy ground and seeing such a vulnerable moment between a mother and son. And all of those pieces continued to kind of pull away at that belief that I had grown up with. And eventually it got to the point where I thought, okay, I've got to like go back to square one and figure out what have I missed? Because there's a lot going on here that does not fit with what I have thought. And so I kind of did go back to square one. I started reading, I started talking with people, trying to understand, why do people use drugs and what causes addiction and how could we reduce harm? Because I started to think that maybe the most impactful way that I could impact children in foster care was not actually to foster, but was to address the reasons why so many of them were in foster care in the first place, kind of go upstream a little bit. And that ended up changing my mind really completely about how we approach substance use, how we approach drugs in general, how we can reduce harm so that more mothers like Joanne have the best opportunity for sobriety and a healthy life, or children like Beckham have the chance to grow up with parents who want them and may be struggling with a substance use disorder of some sort. But if we can find a way to help bring healing to the deeper thing that's going on in their parents' lives, could actually be a very different outcome for them, and one that allows them to stay together and grow up together.
So when we look at women that are pregnant, that are using drugs, what approaches are out there now that are, trying to get them to change? And how would you maybe differ those approaches?
Yeah, so there's kind of two different things that are happening right now, depending on what state you're in. So some states approach substance use in pregnancy through a very health-centered lens. So their goal is get the mom under the care of a doctor. And if she's using opioids, the healthiest thing for her baby is for her to be on a medication-assisted treatment. That's a stabilizing treatment like buprenorphine during pregnancy. That's gold standard pregnancy care for a woman who's struggling with an opioid addiction. Some states, that is like kind of state sanctioned. That is how they approach substance use in pregnancy. Some states do not differ. They don't distinguish between a mom who's using something that's prescribed by a doctor to help her stay healthy and heroin that she might have bought on the street. And so there are women who are being punished for taking a medication during their pregnancy that their doctor prescribed to them, just because the law does not distinguish between whether or not they're using something prescribed or whether they're using something they, bought on the street.
And what do you mean they're being punished? How are they punished?
So in some states, you can be arrested for substance exposure to your...
Even when your doctor prescribed it.
Yes. Yeah, you could, or it could be a child welfare situation. For most of those where it's a prescription, it's still a reason that a child can be removed from their parents' custody. So, and then in some states there, and this is happening in a couple of counties in Mississippi, it's happening in Alabama, some other places, where women are being prosecuted for child abuse, which is a felony, like 10-year prison sentence for using drugs while they're pregnant, for exposing their children to substances. So that's not happening for what if they're using a drug that was prescribed by their doctor, like buprenorphine. But it is happening for women who are using something that they might have bought on the street. And so I want us to wrestle with that a little bit, because you and I would both say 100%, should a woman, is it healthy for her to be using a drug she bought on the street while pregnant? No, definitely not. We don't want her doing that. So when we take a step back and say, what then is the best way to help her not do that? What's the best way for her child to have the best chance of not being exposed? It's for her to be under the care of a doctor, because that's going to be her pathway either to treatment or to medication or whatever good is going to happen. That needs to be, the doctor is the number one place that's going to help her baby. But if she's afraid to go to the doctor because she's afraid that a doctor visit might end up with an arrest, with her child growing up in foster care, with her being in prison for 10 years, she's not going to go to the
even
doctor.
just with a lot of shame. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? If that's a shame-filled experience, she's not going to do that either.
Yeah. And so there's a growing up in a very conservative culture, in the church culture I grew up in, it's very much still the culture I'm part of now. There's a lot of it tends to be that when we see someone doing something that we think is unhealthy or we think is against our values, that the knee-jerk reaction is, if they just know that we don't want them doing it, if we just make them feel bad about it, then they won't do it. And that is true here too. There's very much a sense of, well, if we want to protect the baby, then let's make sure the mom is scared of not protecting the baby. But that's not how it works. You can't scare a mom into going to the doctor. That just is, it doesn't work. If she's feeling afraid, she's not going to go to the doctor. I mean, that's a normal response. If you said, Donna, if you go to the doctor, you could end up in prison for 10 years, but you should go. But you should go, Donna. That's what you need to do. You're not going. And so sometimes the heart behind what we want could be good. Like, we want children to be protected. We don't want them to be substance exposed in utero. But the approach that we take can actually backfire and produce a lot of unintended consequences. And that's what it's doing here for women. So that's just one of the kind of angles that we would encourage people to think about. Not what we hope a policy does, but what does it actually do? What's going to be the, a mom who's already struggling, what is her decision making? How is it going to be affected by this? And hanging punishment over her head is not a way to say it's safe. Come to medical care. Come and let us help you. We need to make sure that she feels that decision to go to the doctor is 100% a safe decision, that she's going to be cared for and her baby is going to be cared for.
So that's one of the things we need to do. Now, you also feel like a compassionate intervention that actually helps her change would be another step. Now, you probably experienced this in this woman's life, that you were parenting her child. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, Joanne, I met her and she was telling me about this treatment center that she knew about and that she had gotten a approval to go to. And it was a treatment center that allowed her to bring Beckham with her into drug treatment. And I heard that and thought, what kind of insanity is this? This is crazy. How on earth? Like, this can't be a good place to have a baby at a drug treatment center. And I'm all of those stigmas in my mind around, people who are struggling with addiction are not trustworthy. It's kind of the lie, cheat, and steal sort of, which can be part of an addiction. People do things that are against their own values when they are struggling with a substance use disorder. So I had never heard of this before. I'd never heard of a treatment center that did this. And so Beckham was with us for about a month while she got settled in treatment. He had some medical concerns during that time. And so the judge finally cleared for him to go with her to treatment after about a month. And so I brought him up to the treatment center. And it was about 2.5 hours away. It's out in a small town in the Delta in Northwest Mississippi. And I brought him there, and it was just this mind-bending experience of walking in the door. All the staff are in like regular plain clothes. They're in like jeans, t-shirts, sweatshirts. You can't tell the difference between who's staff and who is a client. It's very much like we respect people. We're not above you. There was they had multiple dogs that were there that they used for pet therapy. They let me tour. They gave me a tour of the whole place. They showed me the nursery where the children are cared for during the day while their parents are going to classes for treatment. They're learning about trauma and they're processing, and they're going to group therapy and individual therapy. And they have childcare on site. And they've got this whole nursery set up. And then each of the like Joanne had her own room with a little bassinet in it for Beckham and all of his things in there. And it was just so outside of what I thought of as this kind of clinical, suspicious sort of environment that I imagine drug treatment to be, or that it should be even. You know, we've got to be careful. We've got to protect ourselves. And it was really just this beautiful experience seeing the staff just overwhelmingly supportive of Joanne and her wanting to parent Beckham and encouraging her in that and being so excited to meet him. And it was just like this family reunion, which it was for her and him, but it was like a family reunion that everyone was involved in. They were just so supportive and so wanting to see her succeed. And I have since learned that that is a really powerful treatment model that's available very few places. We have only 2 treatment centers in Mississippi that allow on-site.
I've never heard of one like that.
Yeah,
No,
it is not common. So we have 2 treatment centers, and even they have only a few beds for women and children to stay together.
What's the name of it?
This one is called Fairland Treatment Center. It's actually part of our public, like it's not a private treatment center. It's part of our like regional mental health treatment centers. And then we have another one called Born Free that's in Jackson, where I live, and it's similar. And so, you know, seeing that and it was just another piece of that new foundation of really getting this different perspective on that what Joanne needed was not blame and shame in her life. She already lived with so much of that after having struggled with addiction for 20 years. What she needed was that people would come alongside her and cheer her on as she was putting in so much work to change her life.
See, my hat's off to you. I am so respect. The challenge you've got here is you've got this little boy that you now are growing very, very fond of. You love this little boy and you want the best for him. And now you're taking him to his biological mom in a treatment center. That is tough. How did you get to the point where you could do that kind of thing without blame and shame?
Oh, I will say this was a divinely inspired, divine kind of encounter, because I will always say that Joanne is the hero of our story, and we are friends. We have stayed in contact. It's been 10 years now since Beckham was with us, and I really do feel that because the relationship between a birth parent and a foster parent is automatically challenging. Even if you can develop rapport, the fact that the state thought some random person was a better parent than you are to your child is an automatically difficult relationship. And even for us who were committed to reunification, if it was possible, it's really difficult not to look at your own family and say, look how stable we are. Look how loving we are. Look how wonderful we are. And really anything else looks not as good as what your family is. And so her ability, her willingness to let me in to who she was. She was so vulnerable, so open, so willing to just lay it all on the table in a way that she didn't have to, but she did. And she did that. She did it for her son because she wanted every bit of connection with him that she could possibly have. But I look at that and say, if the roles had been reversed, would I have been humble enough to let someone else see such a vulnerable part of myself, to see me in my worst place where the state has determined I can't parent my own child and they've taken custody? That's really hard. And so I have thought about this a lot recently, because I still, just thinking about the journey that this has been for the last 10 years, of fostering, of adoption, of these different relationships that have come out of that. And, there's a part of me that goes, gosh, I wouldn't change anything. I mean, I am who I am today because of these experiences. And yet, gosh, I'm glad I didn't know what was coming, because the journey has been really painful.
You wouldn't have done it.
But I think that's true in most of life. If we knew how hard most things were before we started them, we wouldn't do
We're
them.
not doing that.
No, so it's good we don't know. And it was, each step of the way was its own. I didn't have to do all of it at one time, and so I'm really thankful for that. I'm thankful that I could. It did feel like a bit of a G-force ride into, rocket ship into space, but so much of that was just kind of staying on the rocket ship, and some of that just was, hey, this is the path that we've chosen, and this is the next step on it. But yeah, you don't, when you sign up for foster care adoption, you have no idea what that road is going to look like, and before we started fostering, even I was leading a ministry at our church that was really just, a lot of it was helping people understand about foster care and adoption if they were interested in it. And so we would host these events, and we would invite probably like 6 different speakers. They would be, birth parents, adoptive parents, foster parents, adoptees, kind of anybody who had a connection. We tried to kind of vary the experiences. And we would just let them share their perspectives and their stories. And you just realize, wow, some adoptees, I asked one woman if she would come and speak, and she was adopted when she was a baby. She was in her 40s at that point. And she was like, I've never really thought about that, because I don't really think about my adoption. Like, I just don't, it does not, just not really, I don't know. It's just like, no, that happened, but this is my family. And then you have some adoptees that have so much sense of loss and abandonment and so much pain surrounding the loss of that birth relationship. And you have no idea what your child's experience is going to be, or how that journey is going to play out over time. And so there's a lot of uncertainty in it. And yet I wouldn't trade it for anything. And it has still been a very hard journey, but one that has changed me in so many positive ways. And that has come through other people, not through my own, not through my own amazingness. It's come through the amazingness of other people like Joanne, who have helped me to reckon with those parts of myself that were, and still are, so judgmental, and so believing that I know best, and being willing to kind of take a little more step back and say, what's going on in their life? I wonder what their world is like. I wonder why they're making the decisions they are. I wonder what that substance is doing for them. They're using it for a reason. What is it doing? What is it numbing for them that makes life easier?
So tell me what End It for Good, what your organization actually does.
Yeah, so we it started off of my own learning journey, and I realized during that learning journey that there were very few opportunities for people to kind of have a safe space to learn. in our polarized times, we don't want to share any kind of vulnerability. We don't want to ask questions.
Someone's going to blast us.
Someone's going to blast it. We're going to get canceled.
Yep.
And so I had found people in places where I could learn and where it was safe to learn. And I wanted to provide that for more people. And so we started out just as a passion project about 2 years before we became a nonprofit. And that was just hosting book discussion events in different places in Mississippi. And I didn't know enough to give a presentation that was like, this is the way you should think. So we would there was a book called Chasing the Scream that I found really helpful. It's kind of the last 100 years of what we've done with drugs and addiction in the United States and what we could do differently to get better outcomes. So we would discuss that. And it really was just a sharing of perspectives. And it was really powerful. And those grew to more and more people. We've had as many as 125 people that have come to one of these. We had to restructure them a bit. You can't do a book discussion with 125 people.
No, you cannot.
But you can still, we would do a 30-minute kind of quick presentation on kind of the big ideas of what we could do to shift away from a criminal justice approach and towards a health-centered approach. And then we would pass a microphone around the room and we would spend an hour and a half. These were 2-hour events in the evening and an hour and a half in people having 1 minute to give their thoughts and their feedback. And we learned so much about why people think the way they do. So all of us are wondering, why do people use drugs? And if you start talking to people, you realize, wow, there's all these different reasons why they're using. And these events helped us to understand, why do people think the way they do about substance use? What are the things that motivate them? Is it personal experience? Is it family struggles? Is it they have brother in law enforcement? There's all kinds of different perspectives. So we started with events. We still host events. We do more speaking at other people's events now than we do hosting our own events. But we started with hosting our own events. Now we do a lot of speaking, podcast interviews. We have our own podcast. We write op-eds, just opinion pieces that get published all over the country. Digital media, anything that we can think of to invite people to consider a different perspective and to consider whether we could get better outcomes if we approached substance use and addiction as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue, which is not to say people shouldn't be accountable for crimes that they commit, but just there's so much of substance use that we automatically assume this is a bad person who needs to be incarcerated.
Put away.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So have you done any legislative work?
Yeah. So we are a 501c3, so we can only do a small bit of actual lobbying, but as we hosted these events, we ended up meeting legislators some of whom attended our events because we would host them in different parts of the state. And we would invite all of the elected officials and all the law enforcement and everybody that was kind of people who have influence in an area, as well as people with direct lived experience. We always really wanted to have people in the room who had been incarcerated, who had struggled with addiction, who had family members, that sort of thing. And so as we began to develop those relationships, we had more and more legislators who would say, hey, fentanyl, we're hearing a lot about fentanyl and the problem of fentanyl and overdose. And what are some helpful ways to address that? And so a couple of years ago here in Mississippi, the legislature voted, unanimously to decriminalize fentanyl testing strips. So it allows people to test the drugs they're about to use and know whether or not they're contaminated with fentanyl. One of the early criticisms of that was, well, isn't this just kind of telling people it's okay to use drugs? And we would say, no, not at all. We don't want people using drugs they bought on the street. But we also know that many people are. And if we can't help someone who's dead. So the best opportunity to help them is first to keep them alive. And this is one way that we can say, look, we're not telling you drug use is okay, but we care about you. We care about your life. Your life is important and we want you to stay alive. until you can get to that point where you are ready to make some different choices. And so that, just that shift in perspective happened over the course of a year here in Mississippi. We had a fentanyl testing strips bill that went nowhere 1 year because everybody said this is just going to encourage people to use drugs. And the next year it was overwhelmingly popular and it passed.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So
do you take credit maybe for some
we
of
were
the
working with
societal shift?
multiple people and other organizations to educate on that, because on that issue, particularly, as with so much of this, it is an education issue. It isn't that legislators want people to die. It's that they just don't know anything about it. Maybe they've never heard of fentanyl testing strips before. And so they hear about it and they go, gosh, I don't want people using drugs. And so for us just to be able to come in and say, yeah, that is completely valid. This is not encouraging people to use drugs. Actually, if you allow fentanyl testing strips to be distributed, it gives you an opportunity to have a touch point with healthcare for people who are using. Now, that's a really positive thing because they're more likely to eventually enter treatment if they have some touch point with people who are connected to treatment resources. And so that, I think that's a really positive thing. Everything positive that happens is always the work of many people. So I'm careful not to say that was us. But yeah, working on that and educating is a big part of what we do. And part of that, for us, this session has been talking with people here in Mississippi about what we were talking about earlier. How do we help pregnant women struggling with addiction to be healthy? We cannot come at this with a punitive first approach. The states that have done that have far worse health outcomes for the baby and the mom. We don't want to do that. And so it's been exciting to see some of those shifts happen. And I think a big part of that is that people are seeing that to shift the way we handle drugs and addiction does not mean we're asking you to let go of your values or to change your values. All we're doing is saying there's some missing education pieces here. We can help fill those in. And this actually is a better expression of the values you already have. This is not a different set of values. This is saying if you care about the life of children in utero, there's a better way to care for them than to try to scare their moms into not using drugs. We can care for those children more effectively if their moms are going to the doctor.
And what you learned with Joanne and what Joanne taught you is you care about people. That is your values. That is what matters really to you, is this love and this compassion for anybody, especially those that might be struggling with something like addiction.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And today, Joanne is doing great. She is incredible. She has been 10 years sober now since her son was a baby. She is a wonderful mother to him. We have our youngest are about the same age. And so, we text about the challenges of boys who don't love school and who would rather be out playing outside or playing a musical instrument. They are the creative minded children, not so much into the academics. But she is working at the treatment center. She's actually been working at the treatment center where she got sober in different roles for the last 10 years.
See, that's so amazing. So she went back and is contributing to that wonderful treatment center.
Yep. She's been working there. She works for a drug court, has been working on opening a sober living home for a kind of a single family dwelling for a mother with children, because there's so little access to sober living for moms with children. Most of our sober living where people can go after they've gone to treatment is kind of built around single people with no children who can just all live together in a home. And if we start thinking about that family, how can a family recover? Expanding access to that is a big deal. And so, she's incredible. I text with her regularly and see her now and then, and it's just amazing. It's amazing I recognize that when I say that, there's people listening who are thinking, gosh, I sure wish that was my story with the birth mom of a child I fostered, or I wish that was my story with my own family member, but they've been to treatment 13 times and they're still not sober. That experience with Joanne is not a universal experience. And I very much recognize that, and the way that I think about that is it is not a guaranteed outcome. But if Joanne was sitting in prison for these 10 years that she has been home, we know what that outcome would have been like. Mm-hmm. We didn't have a guarantee with her being able to go to treatment. But if she had gotten caught using instead of being able to go to treatment, she would have been arrested. She was using illegal drugs. And so it is opportunity that we're trying to create more of, not guarantees. There are no guarantees in life, but in the world of substance use and addiction, that's especially true. People's journey out of addiction can take many years. But if we can focus on helping them stay alive and giving them the best opportunities to recover, then we can have more outcomes like Joanne and Beckham.
And it sounds like we need more treatment centers like she went to.
Yeah.
And so that treatment center again, what was the name of it?
Fairland
Center. And so finding more treatment centers with that philosophy of compassion and bringing in family. I love what you've said, and we'll kind of conclude with this thought. Everyone knows that the solution to addiction is better relationships. That connection with people is what overcomes addiction. And so developing treatment centers and experiences like with yourself, where the connection with somebody else helps them to overcome the addiction, that would be good.
Yes, absolutely. Having treatment centers that offer trauma-informed care, that are helping people deal with the reasons why they're using drugs. I have a friend who's an addiction therapist, and he said, when he was first starting out in his practice and would talk about whatever the addiction was, he'd talk about the drugs or the alcohol or the pornography or whatever the thing was the client was addicted to, there wasn't a whole lot of improvement. And he shifted that to start talking about their life. And just let's don't talk about whatever the thing is that you're addicted to. Let's just talk about your life, and let's talk about, highs and lows, and began to realize talking about their life is what actually helped them to work on the addiction, because what the addiction is too is just the coping mechanism. That's not the problem. The drugs are not the problem in a person's life. The problem is what is going on deeper inside, to your point about connection. When you deal with that is what's going to allow a person not to need that strong coping mechanism of numbing. And so when you heal the trauma, you heal the disconnection, you bring in better relationships, all of those things, that's what is going to help people to be able to say, I can live without these substances because I can be present in my own life without the need to numb the way that I feel. So that is such a beautiful journey that I've been on, of just thinking about, even for me as a person of faith and being part of different communities, how can we help create and be part of communities that are welcoming to people, that give people relationships, that give them a sense of belonging and purpose. All of us, you don't have to work in a drug treatment center to be able to offer that.
And that's especially true for the audience that may be listening to this, which may be families considering doing adoption or doing foster care or foster to adopt. I mean, we come into foster care with the idea that we're going to adopt a child, and to expand that a little bit to think, I may seriously be someone that might be helping the mom. Am I up for that? Is that, even when it may mean that I lose the child back to the mom? And is that something that is part of who I am?
Yeah. And part of that question is, can we love a child enough not to keep them, but can we love them enough to give them back and to give them their birth family as their permanent family instead of our family? And that is a tough calling. That is a tough journey, but it can be, not always, but it can be the best gift that we can give to a child.
And then being a support for that family. And that's what you've been. This has been lovely. Christina, thank you. Thank you for the person you are and the kind of work that you're doing and the journey that you've had. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks for having this conversation with me. It's always a joy, especially to talk to other people on the other side who are either adoptive parents or foster parents, people on the journey or thinking about the journey. This is so close to my heart, and just thankful to be part of that conversation.
And for those who are wondering about her program, we will, of course, we'll put a link to it. And please feel free to reach out and ask any questions you have. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Adoption. I'm Donna Pope.
And I'm Nathan Gwilliam. Every voice in the adoption triad deserves to be heard and understood.
Visit voicesofadoption.org to subscribe and access additional resources. And then join us next time as we continue to build bridges through conversation.